in the small village of Oakbrook, surrounded by rolling hills and thick forests, there lived a young man named Adalric. He was 18 years old, tall and strong from working in the blacksmith shop with his father, Haldor. Every day, Adalric spent hours hammering at the forge, shaping metal into tools and weapons. But in his heart, he dreamed of more than just being a blacksmith. He wanted to create something special, something that would make his name known far and wide. He wanted to be remembered as a great craftsman. Adalric had always been curious. He spent his free time wandering the village, learning about the world beyond Oakbrook. He had heard stories from the traveling merchants about distant lands and exciting adventures. But no matter how much he longed for something more, he always returned to his humble life in the village. Adalric had a special friend, Elena. She was 16 years old, mischievous, and full of energy. She loved to play jokes on him, especially when it came to his feelings for Selena. Selena was 19, beautiful and charming. Everyone in the village admired her, but Adalric admired her for more than just her looks. She had a kind heart and a warm smile, and she always knew how to make Adalric feel better when he was down. However, Adalric could never quite bring himself to tell her how he felt. He feared that she might never look at him the way he looked at her. "Adalric," Elena said one afternoon, "you're so quiet. Are you thinking about her again?" Adalric sighed. "I don't know, Elena. I feel like I'll never be good enough for her." "You won't know unless you try," Elena teased, poking him in the ribs. Adalric smiled, but deep down, he was unsure. As the days passed, things began to change in Oakbrook. Adalric's father, Haldor, who had always been strong and hardworking, started to show signs of weakness. He would cough more often, and he seemed tired even after a full day at the forge. At first, Adalric thought it was nothing, just a passing illness. But it soon became clear that his father's health was getting worse. Adalric tried to keep the forge going, but without his father's help, it became harder. He worried about how they would survive if Haldor couldn't work. His mother was kind, but she had never been skilled in the blacksmith trade. It was up to Adalric to hold everything together. One day, a merchant named Roderick visited the village. He was a tall man with a sharp suit and a gold ring on his finger. He had traveled through many towns and seemed to know everyone. Roderick offered to buy metal goods from the village at a good price. He promised to pay a fair amount, which seemed like a lifeline to Adalric and his family. But there was something about Roderick that made Adalric uneasy. He was always too polite, too smooth in his speech. Adalric didn't trust him, but he knew the family needed the money. Meanwhile, Selena began spending more time with Adalric. She would visit him at the forge, offering words of encouragement and helping him when she could. Adalric's feelings for her grew stronger with every passing day, but he didn't know how to express them. He feared that his humble life as a blacksmith would never be enough for her. Roderick's deal with the village seemed too good to be true. He promised to pay a lot for high-quality metalworks, and the villagers, including Adalric's father, agreed to take the deal. Adalric saw this as his big chance. He worked tirelessly at the forge, crafting the best tools and weapons he could make. This was his chance to prove himself, not just as a blacksmith, but as someone who could help his family. But as the days went on, Adalric started to notice strange things. Roderick seemed to be getting more and more control over the village. He made promises to buy from everyone, but he wasn't paying fairly. Some villagers complained that they were being offered too little for their goods. Adalric began to worry that Roderick had a hidden agenda. Selina continued to be kind and supportive, and her beauty seemed even more dazzling whenever she smiled at him. Adalric couldn't help but feel torn. He wanted to focus on his work, but his feelings for her kept getting in the way. One evening, after a long day at the forge, Selina found him sitting alone on a bench outside the blacksmith shop. "You look troubled, Adalric," she said softly. "I'm just trying to figure things out," Adalric replied. "I want to do more for my family, for the village, but there's something about Roderick I don't trust." Selina nodded. "I feel the same. I don't think he's being honest with us." Adalric felt a wave of relief wash over him. "You really think so?" "I do," Selina said. "But we need to be careful. I don't want anyone to get hurt." Adalric smiled. "Thanks for believing in me." The more time Adalric spent with Selina, the more he realized how much he cared for her. But she was always surrounded by other suitors, including Roderick, who was determined to win her heart. Adalric could see the way Roderick looked at her, always trying to impress her with his charm. It made Adalric's heart ache, but he didn't know what to do. One day, while working on a new set of swords for Roderick, Adalric saw Selina talking to him at the market. Roderick was smiling, making her laugh, and Adalric felt a twinge of jealousy. But he also knew that Roderick was not the right man for her. There was something about him that didn't feel genuine. Selina looked up and saw Adalric watching them. She quickly excused herself from Roderick's company and walked over to him. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. "I'm fine," Adalric replied, though he felt anything but fine. "I just wish I knew how to be better, how to make things right." Selina placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You're already doing so much. You're strong, Adalric. Don't doubt yourself." Her touch made Adalric's heart race. He wanted to say so much, but the words didn't come. Instead, he simply nodded. As Adalric dug deeper into Roderick's dealings, he discovered something that shocked him. Roderick wasn't just trying to take over the village market. He was pressuring the villagers to sell their goods for next to nothing, using his charm and influence to manipulate them. Roderick planned to buy everything at a low price, then sell it for much more, keeping the profits for himself. Adalric knew he couldn't let this happen. He couldn't stand by while the people of Oakbrook were taken advantage of. He knew he had to act, but he wasn't sure how. One evening, Selina came to him with her own concerns. "Adalric, I've heard things. I don't trust Roderick. He's not the man he seems to be." "I know," Adalric said, his voice low with anger. "I've seen it too, but I don't know how to stop him." Selina looked at him with kind eyes. "You have to fight for what's right, Adalric. I believe in you." Adalric stood in front of the forge late one night, the fire crackling as he thought deeply. He had seen the truth about Roderick's schemes, but what could he do? The merchant was well connected, and if he accused Roderick without evidence, it might endanger his family and the village. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that staying quiet wasn't an option. If Roderick succeeded, the village would fall into ruin. His mind kept returning to the words Selina had said earlier. "You have to fight for what's right, Adalric. I believe in you." They kept echoing in his ears, giving him a strange feeling of courage he hadn't had before. She believed in him. Maybe he should believe in himself too. Adalric looked out the open window of the forge, where the moonlight cast shadows across the quiet village. He knew he had a decision to make. If he did nothing, Roderick would win. But if he stood up to him, there was a chance things could get better for everyone. He heard a knock at the door, and Elena stepped inside. She was grinning as usual, but there was a concern in her eyes. "You're still awake?" she asked, her voice full of mischief. "What's going on, Adalric? You've been quiet all day." Adalric turned to her, his mind racing. "I'm thinking about what to do with Roderick. He's been taking advantage of everyone in this village, and I don't know how to stop him." Elena frowned. "Well, you're not alone in this. I'll help you however I can. You know that." "I can't ask you to risk everything for me," Adalric said, his voice filled with doubt. "Adalric," Elena said, walking closer, "you're not alone in this. You've always been there for me, and I'll always be there for you. Besides, I don't like how that merchant acts. He's not the type of person we need around here." Adalric smiled at her words, grateful for her friendship. He wasn't alone after all. "I just don't know how to prove it," he said. Elena gave him a cheeky grin. "Leave that to me. I have a few tricks up my sleeve." The day of the village council meeting arrived, and Adalric felt his heart race. He had gathered what evidence he could, but it still didn't feel like enough. Would the villagers believe him? Would they stand by him if they found out the truth about Roderick? He walked to the village square with Elena at his side, both of them quiet but determined. When they reached the town hall, the atmosphere was tense. Villagers had gathered, murmuring among themselves as they waited for the meeting to start. Roderick was there too, standing confidently at the front, his usual charm in full display. Adalric took a deep breath. "I have to do this," he muttered to Elena, and she gave him a reassuring nod. As the council began, Roderick spoke first, praising his own generosity and kindness to the village. He promised more deals and more money if the villagers continued to sell to him. Many villagers seemed impressed, but Adalric could see through his smooth words. This wasn't about helping them. It was about controlling them. Finally, it was Adalric's turn. He stood up slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he held a bundle of papers. "I have proof," he said, his voice shaking at first, but gaining strength as he spoke. "Roderick has been pressuring the villagers to sell their goods for far less than they are worth. He's planning to make a fortune by taking advantage of us, and he doesn't care about the village." The room fell silent. Roderick's face twisted into a scowl, and for the first time, Adalric saw the merchant's true nature. "You're lying," Roderick shouted. "I've only been helping you all." "No, you haven't," Adalric replied firmly. "You've been stealing from us." He laid out the evidence, letters, trade deals, and accounts showing that Roderick had been paying villagers less than the market value for their goods. Slowly, the villagers began to understand what was happening. They murmured among themselves, and the tension in the room grew thicker. With the help of some of the village's respected elders, Adalric and the villagers began to piece together a plan to expose Roderick's schemes. The merchant tried to defend himself, but it was too late. The truth had come out, and Roderick could no longer hide his greed. In the end, the villagers banded together to force Roderick to leave. The merchant was stripped of his power and sent away, never to return to Oakbrook. With Roderick gone, the village of Oakbrook began to recover. The market was once again fair, and the villagers could sell their goods without fear of being taken advantage of. For the first time in a long time, the people were able to smile, knowing that their hard work was truly valued. Adalric continued his work at the forge, but now he had something more: Selena's heart. She had always been there for him, supporting him when he needed it most. Now she was with him in more than just friendship. One evening, after the council meeting had ended, Selena found Adalric outside the blacksmith shop, looking at the stars. She walked over quietly and stood beside him. "You did it, Adalric," she said softly. "I couldn't have done it without you," he replied, turning to face her. "You've always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Selena smiled, her eyes bright with warmth. "I always knew you had it in you." Adalric hesitated for a moment, but then he took a deep breath and said, "I care about you, Selena. I've always cared about you." Her face lit up, and she took a step closer. "I care about you too, Adalric." It was then that Adalric realized that the dream he had always longed for wasn't just about being a great craftsman. It was about having the love and support of those who truly mattered. The future looked bright. With Selena by his side and Elena's friendship to guide him, Adalric knew he was ready for whatever came next. He had already proved his strength, not just as a blacksmith, but as a man who cared for others. And as for Oakbrook, it was a village of hope again, a place where the people were free to live without fear. Adalric's family was safe, the market was thriving, and the village was no longer under the shadow of Roderick's greed. There was peace, and with that peace came the promise of new beginnings.